welcome to your deep dive. We're diving into the world of Bitcoin ETFs today. You guys have sent over some really interesting articles.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, there's a real head scratcher going on. We're seeing record-breaking inflows into Bitcoin ETFs.
Yeah.
Billions of dollars just flooding in.
I know.
But here's the thing. The price of Bitcoin itself, acting like it didn't get the memo.
Right.
It's fascinating. So today, we're going to unpack why that's happening and what it could mean.
It's like watching one of those financial thrillers playing out.
Totally.
You've got all the makings of a price explosion, right?
Yeah.
But the fuse, it's on a slow burn.
It really is.
A good reminder that in finance, well, things aren't always as simple as they appear.
Absolutely. So let's set the scene. Bitcoin ETFs just blasted past a huge milestone, $20 billion in net inflows.
Huge.
And get this, they did it in just 10 months.
Wow.
10 months. To put that in perspective, the gold ETFs took them a full 5 years to hit that same benchmark.
Yeah, it's really remarkable.
What's the message there, in your view?
To me, it screams how quickly Bitcoin is becoming a mainstream investment.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. 5 years for gold versus 10 months for Bitcoin. That's unheard of.
It's incredible.
It speaks volumes about how perceptions are changing. Bitcoin. It's
Yeah.
not that fringe speculative asset anymore. We're
Right.
talking major players, institutions. They're recognizing Bitcoin's potential, and
Yeah.
they're putting serious money down.
They are, but we have this almost insatiable appetite for Bitcoin ETFs, yet Bitcoin's price itself
Right.
isn't mirroring that excitement. It's around $68,570. Not bad, obviously. But it's having trouble pushing past that $70,000 mark.
Yeah.
What's happening behind the scenes? Is it just a waiting game before the price catches up? Or is there something else going on?
$1 million question. Part of it is just the nature of markets.
Okay.
We tend to think more money in, price goes up, right?
Right.
Direct correlation.
Yeah.
But it's rarely that simple. Often there's a lag, sometimes a few days, between those inflows actually impacting the spot price of Bitcoin. Like a ripple effect more than a sudden wave.
Okay, so maybe a delayed reaction.
Exactly.
Like when you eat something spicy and think, oh, I'm good. And then bam!
Exactly.
But even with that delay, you'd think the sheer volume would have a bigger impact. What else could be counteracting that upward pressure?
Well, remember, it's not just about the money coming in.
Right.
It's about how it's being used once it's in play.
Okay.
And institutional investors, they've got strategies.
Right.
They're major players in this.
So we're talking institutional investor, the big fish in the pond. What are they doing with all that capital that might explain this price puzzle?
Strategy, that's the key word. They're not just buying and holding Bitcoin like a lot of us might.
Right.
We touched on delta neutral trading earlier, and that's one way they're navigating this.
For those of us who haven't quite mastered delta neutral trading yet,
Sure.
can you break that down? How does that work?
Imagine walking a tightrope, financially speaking. That's delta neutral trading.
Okay.
It's all about balancing your bets, hedging against risk. Right. Institutions use a mix of options, futures, spot trading, and they're essentially neutralizing their exposure to Bitcoin's actual price movements. So they're buffered against those sudden swings.
So they're in the game, they're playing the field, taking advantage of the volatility,
Exactly.
but they're not necessarily betting on the price going up or down.
Right.
It's like, hey, we're here for the ride, not just the destination.
Chuckles. Exactly.
But if they're not the ones driving the price up, then who is? Who's pouring all this money into Bitcoin ETFs if the big players are staying so neutral?
Well, it's got to be a mix of things, right? You've still got your long-term holders, the true believers.
Yeah.
They're using this chance to accumulate more Bitcoin. You've got new institutions maybe dipping their toes in, trying out the ETFs before they, dive headfirst into direct Bitcoin investments.
Sure.
And of course, you have retail investors. Like you said, they see ETFs as an easier, less intimidating way to get involved.
Like a financial melting pot.
It really is.
All these different players, different reasons, all converging on Bitcoin ETFs.
Yeah.
And then you throw in the news from last week, the SEC approving those first Bitcoin ETF options here in the U.S.
Yeah.
That's huge, right?
Huge. It just shows how Bitcoin is gaining legitimacy, even with regulators.
Yeah.
Adding options to the mix. That brings a whole new level of sophistication to the market.
So for those of us who are, like, still trying to figure out how to buy our first Bitcoin,
Yeah.
why are options such a game changer?
Think of it like this options trading is like having a whole toolbox instead of just a hammer.
Okay.
It gives traders more flexibility, more leverage.
Yeah.
They can capitalize on specific price movements up or down, or even generate income with things like covered calls. There's just more options, literally.
So more tools for the pros. But what about the rest of us? Does this even matter if we're not trading options?
It does. It definitely trickles down. Think about it. More sophisticated trading usually means more liquidity in the market, and more liquidity means more stability, tighter spreads, a smoother ride for everybody, even if you're just buying a little Bitcoin through an ETF.
Okay, so it's like paving the way, making it easier for more people to get involved.
Exactly.
The more the big players have their fancy tools, the smoother the road gets for everybody else.
Right.
But even with all this, even with the new tools, the growing acceptance, we're still seeing this disconnect, these huge inflows. But the price is hesitant.
I know. It's interesting, isn't it?
It's like we're in this holding pattern, and everyone's waiting to see what happens next. What's going to tip the scales? What are you looking at?
Well, price action, of course, that's key. Will Bitcoin break through that $71,000 resistance level?
Yeah, $71,000. That's the magic number.
Right. It's a psychological barrier if it breaks through, strong and decisive with volume.
Right.
That could be a sea change. It could trigger a wave of buying pressure.
Yes.
Push Bitcoin to new heights.
So we watch $71,000. That's what we're looking for. But what if it stalls out? What if it just can't break through?
Well, then things get really interesting because if Bitcoin can't break through, even with all this money pouring in, it might mean the demand isn't as strong as we think, or it could mean that the big players are waiting for a better time to buy.
Interesting. So price action is important, but it's not the whole story.
Yeah.
What else are you watching, especially in terms of institutional adoption?
Right. Well, will we see more big names like BlackRock jumping in? What about pension funds, endowments, even governments? Because institutional adoption, it's not just about the money.
Right.
It's about legitimacy. Every time a big player joins, it makes Bitcoin a little more acceptable for the next wave of investors.
Like a snowball effect.
Exactly.
More legitimacy, more investment, more legitimacy.
Right. And for everyday investors, the ones who aren't moving millions of dollars.
Right. The rest of us.
I'd say keep an eye on things like active Bitcoin addresses transaction volume. Those are good indicators of actual use. And don't discount sentiment. What are people saying? Are they excited, nervous? Social media forums, they can give you a feel for the overall mood.
So look beyond the headlines. Do your own research. Try to understand what's really going on.
Exactly.
It's a lot to process, but it feels like we're at a real turning point here.
The Bitcoin ETF landscape is changing so fast. Record inflows, this fascinating dance between institutional and retail investors, new trading tools. It's a really pivotal moment in finance, and honestly, who knows what happens next.
That's what makes it so exciting, though.
It really is. It's like we're watching a new financial era being born.
It really does feel that way. Well, on that note of exploring uncharted territory, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive.
Sounds good.
Thanks to everyone for joining us on this journey into the world of Bitcoin ETFs. Keep learning, keep asking those questions, and keep diving deep.